It was Friday, December 6, 1991, in Austin, Texas, a city buzzing with the cheerful hum of the holiday season, where the streets were dotted with twinkling lights and shop windows dressed in tinsel, wreaths, and paper snowflakes, and though the chill in the evening air hinted at winter, the atmosphere was warm with anticipation of Christmas only weeks away. In the northern part of the city, a small frozen yogurt shop called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt sat quietly in a strip mall on West Anderson Lane, a cozy little place with its soft pastel walls, bright overhead lights, and the faint hum of refrigerators mixing with the sweet scent of vanilla and chocolate. On this particular evening, for girls, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison, Jennifer's 15-year-old sister Sarah Harbison, and 13-year-old Amy Ayers came together for what was meant to be an ordinary, harmless night. Eliza, a responsible and kind-hearted high school senior, worked part-time at the shop, often closing with Jennifer, who was equally dependable. Known for her quick smile and the way she could make a dull shift feel lighter with her easy sense of humor, Sarah and Amy had no work that night. They were simply along for the company, having spent earlier hours wandering through nearby shops and talking about weekend plans, high school gossip, and the kind of future dreams that fill the heads of teenagers. The four of them were dressed casually but warmly against the December air. Light denim jackets over pastel-colored t-shirts, straight blue jeans, white sneakers, their hair loose and natural, the kind of look that, while simple, would etch itself into memory forever because these would become the last outfits they'd ever wear. The yogurt shop was nearly empty as the evening wound down, with only a few customers coming and going in the final hour before closing, some stopping for a late dessert, others chatting briefly before heading back into the night, and though later testimony would recall certain faces and interactions, nothing in those final moments raised alarms in the girls' minds. Eliza focused on wiping down the counters, moving with the steady pace of someone who had closed up many times before, while Jennifer counted the cash register, her hands quick but methodical, occasionally glancing up to share a comment or laugh with Sarah and Amy, who were leaning against the counter, sipping on small cups of yogurt and flipping through a magazine. Outside, the parking lot was still, the sound of a passing car now and then mixing with the faint rustle of wind through the nearby trees, and if anyone had been watching from the darkness, they would have seen a picture of perfect teenage normalcy for friends in their own world, shielded by the walls of a brightly lit shop. Around 10 p.m., the girls began the routine that signaled the end of the shift, cleaning the yogurt machines, emptying trash bins, locking the side door. Sarah and Amy lingered near the front, occasionally stepping outside to peer into the cool night air before returning inside, while Eliza and Jennifer moved between the kitchen and the front counter. At some point, perhaps shortly after 10, a few last-minute customers came in, details that would later become points of heated debate in courtrooms and police files, but in the moment, it was just part of the job, ringing up small orders, offering polite smiles, and moving on with closing duties. Austin at night in 1991 had a quiet rhythm in this part of town, the kind of place where you might leave your doors unlocked, where danger felt distant, almost abstract, something you read about in newspapers from other cities, never imagining it could be lurking just beyond the glass windows of a frozen yogurt shop. And yet, as the clock inched closer to 11 p.m., somewhere in the dark, danger was indeed moving closer. Later, police would try to piece together who might have been in or near the shop at that critical time. There were rumors of two men loitering, a strange vehicle parked nearby, and unexplained movements in the parking lot. But here in this moment, inside the shop, there was only the easy comfort of her friends wrapping up their night, perhaps talking about Christmas shopping, school, finals, or the small weekend adventures they looked forward to. None of them could have imagined that in less than 2 hours, the shop would be engulfed in flames. Firefighters would force their way in, and what they would find would haunt Austin for decades. But this first part of their story is a time capsule of innocence, the hum of machines, the scent of yogurt and coffee, the denim jackets and pastel t-shirts, the friendly chatter and occasional burst of laughter, the simple joy of youth that had no idea it was standing on the edge of an abyss. When we pause here, we freeze them in that light, safe and whole, before the shadow falls and turns the small yogurt shop into the site of one of America's most shocking unsolved crimes. The clock had barely pushed past midnight when the first flicker of orange light was spotted by a passerby driving along West Anderson Lane. the faint glow escaping through the lower edges of the yogurt shop's windows, at first looking like nothing more than the reflection of distant Christmas lights, but within minutes, the glow grew brighter, sharper, accompanied by the faint shimmer of heat and the muffled crackle that only fire makes. And soon a call went into Austin's fire department reporting smoke in the strip mall. The firefighters who responded that night later recalled that they expected a small kitchen fire, maybe an electrical short, the kind of thing you could knock down quickly before it spread to the other units. But as Engine 12 rolled up to the scene, the crew could see through the glass that this was no minor blaze. Thick black smoke clung to the ceiling, swirling above the counter, and the flames were licking along the back wall, throwing a sinister glow across the pastel-colored interior. They forced the front door open, the burst of fresh air feeding the fire and sending a hot wave rolling toward them. And as they pushed inside through the haze, the acrid smell of burning plastic and scorched paper hit them hard. But beneath, it was another odor, heavier, metallic, and instantly alarming. Moving quickly toward the source of the fire, their flashlights cut through the smoke, and what they saw in the far corner of the shop stopped them cold. The bodies of 4 girls, bound, gagged, and positioned in a way that would later baffle investigators, their once casual denim jackets and pastel-colored t-shirts now scorched, their jeans darkened by heat and smoke, their white sneakers barely visible beneath debris. For a moment, the fire crew froze, the shock of realizing they weren't dealing with an accident, but with a crime scene crashing in. All at once, and then training kicked in, extinguish the flames, preserve what you can, and call in law enforcement. Even in the chaos of fire suppression, it was obvious this was no ordinary killing. The scene was staged, deliberate, and brutal, and the fire was likely set to erase evidence. But it had only partially succeeded. Within the hour, Austin police arrived, the strip mall sealed off with crime scene tape, and detectives began the grim process of documenting what was left. The shop's cash register was open, money gone, suggesting robbery, but the positioning of the victims and signs of assault made it clear there was far more at play. Outside, the December night was still cold, and a small crowd began to form at a distance. Drawn by the flashing lights and the heavy presence of patrol cars, some were neighbors. Some were friends of the victims who had heard about the fire on late-night police scanners, and among them were parents who had been waiting for their daughters to come home. The moment police confirmed the identities, the reality shattered whatever fragile hope had remained. Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, and Amy Ayers were all dead, their final moments trapped forever in that closed-up yogurt shop. Detectives immediately began retracing their last known hours, piecing together witness statements from customers who had been in the store before closing. And what emerged was a hazy but chilling timeline. Sometime after 10 p.m., at least 2 men had been seen inside the shop, lingering near the counter, speaking in low tones. One wearing a baseball cap, the other in a dark jacket, but their faces weren't clearly remembered. Another witness swore they saw the girls locking up just before 11. Yet the fire wasn't reported until nearly an hour later, a gap in time that became a focal point of the investigation. As the bodies were examined, medical reports revealed that all 4 victims had been shot in the head, execution style, and that at least one had been subjected to additional violence, leading police to suspect a sexual motive alongside robbery. But the most haunting detail for investigators was the sheer youth of the victims, 4 teenagers, dressed in the same casual outfits they'd worn all night, their hair still falling in natural waves as if caught mid-conversation, now forever. Silent, Austin, a city not accustomed to this kind of horror, reacted with shock and fear. The case dominating local news broadcasts, crime tip lines lighting up with calls from people convinced they'd seen something suspicious that night. A strange car idling near the strip mall, a man pacing outside the shop, muffled voices behind the glass, but every lead seemed to fray at the edges. In those first days, detectives worked around the clock, processing physical evidence from the shop, shell casings, fragments of rope, partial shoe prints, even a smudge on a counter that might have been a fingerprint. But 1991 technology couldn't yield instant answers, and while DNA testing was in its early stages, it wasn't yet the tool that could crack a case in days. Instead, the investigation leaned heavily on interviews, canvassing the area, and re-interviewing witnesses in the hope that memory would sharpen over time. Inside the police department, detectives argued theories. Was this the work of strangers passing through town, hardened criminals who saw an opportunity? Or was it someone local? Someone the girls might have recognized, which explained why they let them remain in the shop after hours. And each theory carried its own trail of suspects and dead ends. In the meantime, the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy were left in an unimaginable state of grief, forced to plan funerals instead of celebrating the Christmas that was supposed to be only 2 weeks away. Their daughters had gone to working to spend time with friends dressed in denim jackets, pastel-colored t-shirts, blue jeans, and white sneakers, looking every bit like the bright, promising young women they were, and had never come home. As days turned into weeks, the yogurt shop sat dark and empty, its windows boarded, the faint smell of smoke still lingering in the air, a silent witness to the horror that had unfolded inside. And Austin's police chief vowed publicly that they would not rest until the killers were caught, a promise that would prove far harder to keep than anyone could have imagined. In the weeks following the murders, Austin's police department found itself under enormous public pressure. The faces of Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, and Amy Ayers, smiling in photographs, dressed in the same casual denim jackets over pastel-colored t-shirts, blue jeans, and white sneakers they had worn that night, becoming a constant presence on television screens, newspaper front pages, and flyers taped to storefronts across the city. The shock had turned into a collective demand for justice, and every small lead that trickled in was treated as urgent, no matter how thin. Detectives canvassed the area around the yogurt shop, knocking on doors in nearby neighborhoods, asking residents if they had noticed anything unusual that night between 10 p.m. and midnight. And while some recalled seeing a pair of young men hanging around the strip mall, others mentioned hearing what might have been a muffled bang, perhaps the gunshots, though no one could pinpoint the exact moment. The media began speculating on the killers' identities, with rumors swirling about local troublemakers, drifters, or even someone with a grudge against one of the victims. But behind closed doors, investigators struggled to find a clear suspect. Then came the first major break. A man in his early 20s named Maurice Pierce was stopped in an unrelated traffic incident about a year later, carrying a .22 caliber handgun, and during questioning, he told police that his friend Forrest Welburn, along with 2 others named Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen, had been involved in the yogurt shop killings. The claim set off a wave of renewed activity, with detectives bringing in all 4 men for intense interrogation sessions that would stretch for hours, sometimes without attorneys present, relying on the pressure of the moment to elicit confessions. Michael Scott, under questioning, eventually broke down and admitted to being inside the yogurt shop the night of the murders, implicating Springsteen as the one who shot the girls. But his story shifted multiple times, and the details he provided didn't always match the physical evidence. Robert Springsteen, when interrogated separately, also confessed, but like Scott, his account contained contradictions and odd gaps, leading defense attorneys later to argue that the confessions had been coerced. Still, with no DNA matching, 1991 and limited forensic options, prosecutors felt they had enough to move forward, framing the case as a robbery gone wrong in which the killers had decided to eliminate witnesses. The trials were tense and highly publicized, with family members of the victims sitting through every painful detail, the crime scene photos, the autopsy reports, the descriptions of how the girls, still wearing their denim jackets and pastel t-shirts, had been bound and shot. In 2001, Robert Springsteen was convicted and sentenced to death, while Michael Scott was convicted and given life in prison. And for a moment, it seemed the long nightmare was over. But beneath the surface, cracks in the case were already forming. Defense teams continued to challenge the reliability of the confessions, pointing to the fact that neither man's DNA matched the unidentified male DNA found on one of the victims, DNA that had been tested with far more advanced methods in the early 2000s that were available in 1991. The other 2 men, Maurice Pierce and Forrest Welburn, had their charges dropped due to insufficient evidence, yet their names remained forever tied to the case in public memory. As appeals moved forward, the once closed chapter began to reopen, revealing just how fragile the original convictions were. In 2009, both Springsteen's and Scott's convictions were overturned after a court ruled that their Sixth Amendment rights had been violated, specifically that the confessions used in trial had improperly referenced each other without the chance for cross-examination. Prosecutors announced they intended to retry the men, but the looming problem of the unmatched DNA belonging to neither suspect hung over the case like a shadow, public opinion began to shift, with some Austinites believing the wrong. Men had been imprisoned while the real killer, or killers, had walked free for nearly 2 decades. For the victims' families, the roller coaster of hope and disappointment was brutal. They had sat through the details of the case twice, believed justice had been served, and now faced the possibility that the crime was still unsolved. Meanwhile, detectives quietly revisited other possible suspects, from transit workers who had passed through Austin in late 1991 to men later convicted of similar crimes in other states. But the trail was cold, the evidence limited, and the memories of witnesses now blurred by time. Yet one thing remained certain: the 4 girls, frozen forever in that moment when they were last alive, dressed in casual denim jackets, pastel t-shirts, jeans, and white sneakers, represented a loss that Austin could never fully process. And every new twist in the case only deepened the city's determination to one day uncover the truth. Where the convictions of Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were overturned in 2009, the city of Austin found itself staring at a haunting truth it had hoped to bury. After nearly 2 decades, the case that had once seemed closed was suddenly wide open again, and the killer or killers of Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, and Amy Ayers might still be walking free. For the victims' families, the reversal was more than just a legal setback. It was a reopening of wounds that had never truly healed. The memory of that December night in 1991 is sharp and raw as ever, with the image of their daughters in the same denim jackets, pastel-colored t-shirts, blue jeans, and white sneakers they had worn to work forever burned into their minds. Prosecutors were adamant that they would retry the 2 men, but they now faced a problem that had grown impossible to ignore: the DNA evidence. Advances in forensic science meant that the partial male DNA profile recovered from one of the victims could be tested with unprecedented accuracy, and those results had been clear. The DNA did not belong to Springsteen, Scott, Pierce, or Welburn, the original 4 suspects. It belonged to someone entirely unknown. This revelation planted seeds of doubt not just in the public, but within the justice system itself, forcing the prosecution to delay any retrial while they searched for a match. Investigators began re-examining old evidence, this time sending items to state-of-the-art crime labs capable of extracting genetic material from the smallest traces, rope fibers, burnt fabric, even debris from the shop floor. But time had taken its toll, and some samples were too degraded to yield anything useful. Still, the hope was that even a partial match might one day link to someone in the expanding national DNA database. While science worked in the background, detectives turned again to the human side of the investigation, revisiting old witness statements to see if fresh eyes could spot patterns missed before. One witness, long dismissed as unreliable, had claimed to see 2 men loitering outside the yogurt shop just after closing, one in a baseball cap, the other wearing a dark jacket, both looking nervous. Another recalled hearing a loud bang followed by hurried footsteps, though they couldn't be certain of the exact time. A former employee of a nearby store came forward saying she'd always believed the killers might have been regulars at the shop, familiar faces who wouldn't have raised suspicion if they had lingered after hours. As these accounts resurfaced, the theory of robbery gone wrong began to feel too simple, with some investigators quietly wondering if the motive had been more personal, perhaps a grudge, an obsession, or a twisted thrill. Yet without hard evidence, these were just threads, and the reality was that the city had lived with this mystery so long it was becoming part of Austin's identity. A cautionary tale told to teenagers about staying safe, a wound carried in the collective memory. Meanwhile, the surviving families tried to push for answers without letting the case consume what remained of their lives. Though each December was a fresh reminder of the night their daughters never came home, vigils were held, candles flickering in the cold, photographs of the girls smiling in their denim jackets and pastel shirts propped on tables, alongside flowers and handwritten notes. In 2011, 2 years after the convictions were overturned, prosecutors finally announced that they would not move forward with a retrial without a DNA match. Their case was too weak, and to risk another failure in court would be to close the door forever. The decision was a gut punch for the families, who had been told for years that justice was within reach, and now found themselves staring at the possibility that it might never come. The suspects were free, living their lives under the cloud of suspicion, while the real perpetrator or perpetrators could be anywhere. For many in Austin, It was a chilling realization that the person responsible might have blended back into ordinary life, shopping at the same stores, walking the same streets, maybe even passing by the boarded-up yogurt shop in the years after. The fire, the official stance from law enforcement became that the case remained open but inactive, with the hope that future advancements in DNA technology could one day identify the source of that mysterious profile. Until then, the crime lived on in documentaries, podcasts, and the minds of those who couldn't stop turning over the details, wondering how for young girls, dressed in the simple casual clothes of an ordinary work shift, could be so brutally taken from the world without anyone seeing the truth. Decades have now passed since the night of December 6, 1991, yet the murder of Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, and Amy Ayers remains a wound in the heart of Austin, an unhealed scar that resurfaces every holiday season, and for those who remember the girls, whether family, friends, or strangers who learned their names from news reports, their memory is inseparable. From the image of them in light denim jackets over pastel-colored t-shirts, blue jeans, and white sneakers, smiling as if the world ahead was wide open, the case has evolved from an active investigation to a haunting symbol of the limits of justice, a reminder that even with all the resources of modern law enforcement, some crimes resist closure. In the years since the overturned convictions, investigators have quietly kept the file open, occasionally retesting evidence as new DNA technologies emerge, hoping that the unknown male profile found on one of the victims might one day match a name in CODIS, the National DNA Database. The expansion of familial DNA searching, where investigators look for partial matches that could point to relatives of a suspect, has added a glimmer of hope, though results so far have been inconclusive. Meanwhile, the city's growth has transformed the neighborhood where the yogurt shop once stood. The charred remains long cleared, replaced by new businesses and new faces. Yet for those who lived in Austin in the early 90s, driving past, the sight could still trigger an almost physical wave of grief. Documentaries and true crime shows revisit the case every few years, piecing together timelines, interviewing former detectives, and speculating about alternate suspects, drifters, passing through, acquaintances of the girls, or individuals later convicted of similar crimes in other states. Amateur sleuths online dissect every detail, debating whether the original four suspects were guilty, partly involved, or completely innocent. But no consensus emerges for the victims' families. These discussions can be a double-edged sword, keeping the case alive in public memory, but also reopening the pain with each theory, each what-if. Anniversaries are marked with vigils and moments of silence, candles flickering in the cold December air. The girls' names read aloud as if speaking them might anchor their spirits to the living. The Harbison family, having lost both Jennifer and Sarah, speaks occasionally to the media, their grief tempered by determination to see justice done, while friends of Eliza and Amy recall small details, a laugh, a shared homework session. The way Amy would talk excitedly about horses, that humanized the tragedy beyond the crime scene. In recent years, technological breakthroughs in genealogy-based DNA tracking have solved decades-old murders, leading many to believe it's only a matter of time before the yogurt shop case finds its resolution. Yet, as of now, the unknown male DNA remains unmatched, an anonymous ghost in the evidence file. Boston itself has changed, its skyline taller, its streets busier, yet in certain quiet moments, a winter night when the air feels the same as it did in 1991, or the sound of distant sirens cutting through holiday traffic, the past feels startlingly close, as if the city itself remembers. For younger generations who learn of the crime through YouTube videos, podcasts, or true crime books, the case is both a mystery and a warning, a reminder that darkness can touch even the most ordinary nights. The girls, forever frozen in time, in their casual work night outfits, never lived to see the turn of the millennium, never graduated, never built the lives they might have had, and the injustice of that fact fuels the continued push for answers. Detectives, both retired and active, have said that while the trail is cold, it's not dead. One phone call, one new match, could break it open at any time. And in the world of modern forensics, miracles do happen. Until then, the yogurt shop murders remain one of America's most infamous unsolved crimes. A story told and riddled not just for its horror, but for the humanity of its victims. A reminder that behind every headline are real people whose absence leaves a void no conviction can truly fill. And as long as Austin remembers, As long as the names Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy are spoken, the search for truth will never truly end.